Just turned on the record meeting so that we can start with recording the presentation. And this is the final webinar for the LSTA grant process. I appreciate all of you participating and walking through the slides as a group. So this particular webinar will focus on implementation and budget. And today's agenda will include the following items that are coming up on the screen. Whoops, I didn't want to go that far. And there'll be a short review. We'll touch on some key points with implementation and touch on the budget and the application review and submitting it, and then questions and answers. So I anticipate, unless there's lots of questions, that we will finish within the same basic timeline as we did last time, which is roughly about 45 minutes or so. If you have questions at any time, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and I'm paying attention to it, so I will respond to it, to the question. If you think of them later, be sure and send us an email, and we will address your questions. So here comes the LSTA review, just to keep it on everybody's radar screen. The federal program is state-based, and it's driven by the Nevada LSTA plan. It's annually funded by Congress, so it could come up against a year when there is no funding or there is a reduced amount of funding. We have an annual grant cycle, which you're in the middle of, including proposals and applications. And then the grant review, there will be an internal grant review with staff, and you'll get the feedback from that and asked to do any final changes on your grant application before it goes forward. And the expectation is that all that go forward are solid. And then in January, the State Council on Libraries and Literacy will convene a meeting, and they will report out on their grant reviews, prioritize them based on scoring, and then the recommendations and priorities will be submitted to Daphne De Leon, who, as the NSLA administrator and state librarian, will make the final decision about award. So this is part and parcel of the steps we've been talking about. We just want to review them and make sure we have everybody on board. Okay, we dealt with need, target, audience, and plans on October 8th, evaluation and outcomes on the 15th. This is the final Thursday webinar, and the webinars are archived on NSLA YouTube. We convert them from what Adobe Connect has recorded, and then we upload them. And if we can make it happen before 5 today, we will. Otherwise, it's Sulin and I will have that as our top priority in the morning. Okay, in terms of timeline, just to reiterate, October was the required webinars. November 13th, the applications are due at NSLA. And what we are looking for, and I'll say this a couple times, is the PDF template. And then you're welcome to print off a copy of it and send that in with a signature on it, or and then you can also PDF that and send it in. But what we really need are the template, the PDF template filled out, and a signed copy of that. At this point in time, we are still working on original signatures, and that may change in the future, but right now we need original signatures. Then January 26th and 27th, there's a state council meeting. Notoriously, and I say that politely, the federal government has in my experience over the last 11 years, has never brought in the budget on time on October 1. And routinely, Nevada doesn't get their notification until after the first of the year. It's anticipated that will be March 2016, as anticipated. And April 2016, if we receive notification in March, the federal budget, should it be approved by then in April 2016, it's anticipated we get an award notification from IMLS, and we can start the grant and aid paperwork process. And there's extra paperwork, as you learned this year, for those of you who are applying. And again, there's additional paperwork that's being driven by federal and state law, and we have to fill it out and put it on file. So at this point, are there any questions? Okay, hearing no typing on the screen, I think we'll move on to the next slide. But if you happen to think of one, be sure and type it in, and we will take a look at it. So we're going to move to implementation, which is a section of the grant application, and that's the how you're going to do it, your plan of action. And what we are looking for in that section, and I know the form looks different than what those of you who have been through this before, what you're used to. So if you have questions about what goes where, be sure to raise those questions and we will address those. So in the plan of action, in the implementation section, we need a detail of activities that will lead to your accomplishments. They should be task-oriented and specific so that they're real clear and clean and literal. You include all the steps. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. That form has space limitations, and so what we're asking you to do is really think through what you're doing and focus it down so that it's business writing. It's really focused, and you're getting right at the key points, which in the end helps the state council review it so that they know exactly what you want and where you're going, and they can do that very quickly. You identify personnel, and if you're going to add personnel, then adding something like a position or job description of what they will be doing to your packet, the paper version when you send it in. Or you can attach it electronically. Either way, we would still need that as part of your implementation. We're also looking for publicity, so that when you're implementing your project, that you're talking about how you want to publicize that with your funding, local funding agencies, with your key target audiences. Just in your local newspaper, your radio, television, or whatever works locally. Specifically indicate who will be involved, your project staff, and your position. If there's multiple ones, then we need to know that, as well as your target group. Specifically, what activities will be taken. You connect it to your need, opportunity, and you provide detail. Part of this grant writing process is to make sure that your activities flow back to the identified need, so that there is a real clear transition going on, so that when the reviewers read it, or when we submit it's given you're awarded, when we submit your final evaluation to IMLS, it's real clear and clean. And IMLS uses this information to lobby on Capitol Hill. They use it for a whole variety of reasons. So we want to make sure that this information is set up and it becomes routine as it works through the system. And we're here to help you with that. Include a timeline. So Anticipate when each step will take place in the process so that you stay on target. And then your project gets completed on time. And I'll take the opportunity right now to remind all of you that these projects are designed for 1 year only. And you need to give yourself enough time in that implementation to do an evaluation at the end of the grant year. Indicate why this approach is being used in terms of your rollout. Are there any alternatives that you might take? Just note those kinds of issues or questions. And I alluded to this a few minutes ago, but it bears repeating. To plan for project publicity, I think in today's world, it's really good to, as a little figure shows here, blow your horn, so that people know that you're here, you're doing stuff. Are you doing a newspaper, radio, social media, webcasts, etc.? And there's various forms of social media that you can use to get out to your target audiences. So anyway, keep this in mind. And as part of this process, you need to give IMLS credit. And if you noted during the last two webinars at the very end, there's an acknowledgement statement in the last PowerPoint slide that is part and parcel of what IMLS is asking you to include with your products or your outcomes or your services or whatever you're putting out there. As I recall, on the website, we have some information about publicity linked on the 2016 page. I'll make sure I verify that when I get back upstairs, because I want to make sure that you have those toolkits that you can use. Okay, and we're at the next section for questions. Anything about publicity that you want to ask about? Timelines? Implementation? Okay. Sulin is typing. So we'll wait. Okay, thank you, Celine. The publicity link is there on the 2016 LSTA URL on our website, so that you can open it up and see what IMLS is looking for in terms of acknowledging them, as well as other kinds of things that you can engage in. Okay, the budget. And the little statement at the bottom of the PowerPoint, do the math, is something that we heartily encourage you. Oh, and Celine also put the URL up in the chat box if you want to write it down, if you don't already have it bookmarked. But do the math. Make sure that your math is correct. And we have set up the Adobe templates to calculate. I would strongly encourage you to run that math separately, just to make sure that before you hit the send button on your final application, everything is clean and clear, because part of what State Council does is review the budget, and you lose points if your math doesn't work. So just FYI, something you need to keep in mind. Okay, let's see how far I can get down here. There we go. We are looking for whole dollars only. And oftentimes we'll get a grant application in and they'll say 50 cents or 40 cents or whatever. And what we want you to do is submit whole dollars only. You can round up or round down depending on what that line item says. That's your call, but whole dollars only, please. And then the costs are during the grant time frame. And just a reminder to park in the back of your memory is that if you're awarded the grant and you start it before July 1, any costs incurred prior to July 1 have to be submitted for payment in that June, whatever fiscal year that June is in. So grant time frame is really important, and we need to make sure everybody pays attention to it. There is a 10% match required, in kind, cash, or a mix thereof. No indirect cost allocation. Well, that's not true. I think I need to update this PowerPoint. There is, and it's part and parcel. I will at this point refer you to the Grant Procedures Manual. Indirect costs have become a different approach. I didn't catch this. I apologize. I should have updated it. But remember that when you submit your grant application, if you request indirect costs, they are not added as an additional figure to your grant. They are built in as part of the total grant. So if you're looking for a grant of $30,000 and your indirect costs were $4,000, we're not awarding you a $34,000 grant. We're only awarding you a $30,000 grant, and your indirect costs have to play underneath that cap. So if you need clarification about that and what's on the website in the Grant Procedures Manual is not clear enough, be sure and send an email, because we want to do this right and make sure it gets clean. What you will notice in the template is that we have a different way of documenting the budget. And the previously you would get a separate page to do your narrative. Now all that information is built right into the budget grid. If it's not real clear for you, be sure and let us know, and we will walk through it. I didn't screen scrape and insert a screen into this PowerPoint. And so what I would prefer to do is, if you have questions about how to make that happen in the new template, send an email. Let's talk. Okay? And, make sure all the specifics are in there. Okay, let me get this up on the screen. The categories have shifted a little bit in terms of how they've been defined. And so I'm going to ask you to read the Grant Procedures Manual very, very carefully. And if you have questions, ask them. And when you submit your grant application, that's one of the things that we will really take a close look at. We'll provide any feedback to you to review your grant budget prior to submission, so it's clean when it comes in. Just letting you know that we'll be available to do that. But we really need for you to pay attention to how those descriptions have changed and what constitutes contractual services now. I've been around long enough that I was used to putting manpower inside of contractual services, and that's not where it sits at this point. So library materials, equipment, we've already talked about the 5,000 plus issue, travel and salaries. So take a look at what it is you want to pay for. Look at the Grant Procedures Manual, which is on the URL that Sue Lynn typed in. And I see you typing, Robbie. So let's have those conversations and make sure that we get this stuff set so it works. And yeah, I'm going to verify that when I get back upstairs. And I appreciate your question, Robbie. I think one of the things that I want to make sure is that we pull the we pull the procedures and be explicit about it, because I'm myself, I will admit that I'm working on long ingrained habit, so I'm double reading stuff. It did change, and I know it's confusing, and I had a lengthy discussion with a current grant implementer yesterday, not personally, but over email and other mechanisms, and it is confusing. So let's make sure that we all get it right, and those procedures are there for a good reason. And if they're not clear, we will take a look at them and deal with it. Oh, here we go again. So in the segment where you explain how the money is spent in the new template, it doesn't have to be wordy, but it needs to be real focused and real right on top of what it is you're going to spend it on. You're asked to identify LSTA grant funds and local in-kind and donated funds and matching funds, and they will be input in a different format, but they are still in there. And we will deal with personnel, positions percentage, and exact amount. Okay. All right, I'm glad. Competitive grants, maximum is 100,000, including indirect costs. So I didn't catch it on the other slide, but I caught it on this one. So again, if you're looking for $100,000 to fund a project, and you're required to submit for indirect costs because that whole set of paradigms has shifted, and your indirect costs are $30,000, then your actual amount available to fund your project is 70 grand. That's part and parcel of it. 10% match required. You need to deal with equipment, automation, hardware, telecommunications hardware. If you are a public library and you do not filter and you're buying a computer equipment that touches the internet, that's an issue, because you have to be in compliance with SIPA, which is a Children's Internet Protection Act, and we touched on that in previous webinars, and most of you are familiar with that and know, that you have to do it. There are peripherals that are a different discussion, and software. Some of this hardware is getting a little iffy and gray, and I noticed Diane Baker had to get a ruling from IMLS at one point for one project that a library was implementing, because it was real gray about how it fit within SIPA. And I did ask our program officer about, microfiche scanners that can talk to the internet, and I didn't get it. That triggers SIPA. If the computer they're attached to it is funded with LSTA money and it touches the internet, that's what kicks SIPA in, as I heard it. So again, with equipment, I'm going to be cautious and be asking lots of questions, because even though I've been around LSTA and LSCA for a very long time, I don't know all the answers, and that's what our program officer is there for. And I already touched on the over 5,000, so we're not going to go on that one. Let's go back. There is a list on the on the website at the URL that Sulin put into the chat box, which gives you a list of what's eligible or not eligible from funding for LSTA. Food and entertainment costs are a problem in terms of using LSTA money to fund those, which is why most of the projects that use them, we make it very clear, because the program officer will raise questions if they see it. Is very clear where that funding comes for if it becomes part of the evaluation. When we say fixed assets are not allowable, if you have a fixed asset you're trying to ask for, send me a separate email. What I understand the language to read is that if you want to, for example, build bookshelves into the wall, that's a fixed asset. If you are buying shelving for books, that's a different discussion. So again, one more time, round all numbers to the nearest dollar, and make sure you take a look on the website for allowable and unallowable costs, because it's better to do it beforehand than have it crop up after you submit it. Additional questions? Okay, Anne, I see you typing. And I'm going to wait until you're done before I go on. Okay. You know, you are locked into the upper limit of the amounts you specify. So, you know, there is some potential reallocation, shifting room inside the budget. Once you figure out, for example, we have people who have spent less money on equipment and so, or on a product, so they were able to buy additional ones with it, and as long as it met the purpose of the grant, that was allowable. But you're not going to be given more money, and I think you all get that one. You need to be as close as possible, and make sure you estimate it as cleanly as possible. I know budgets are estimates, and yet you can get quotes and try to hold them. Depends on what you're buying. And I'm not trying to wiggle out of answering your question, Anne, but I do get what you're trying to, I think I get what you're trying to ask, and you know, you need to do it to the best amount you can, and if circumstances change and you are awarded the grant and you go to the implementation and circumstances change, that's where we have budget revisions. Okay, so Becky, are you still typing? You're welcome, Anne. Okay, while Becky is typing, I'm going to go ahead with the next slide, and I'll pay attention to the chat box, and we'll stop the slides to answer your questions. Oh, here we go. We have investment of personnel above and beyond that we use for the in-kind. Should that be mentioned in the salary description? You mean if somebody is working 50% of their time on their project, and that's your in-kind, do you document the rest of their salary? Just to clarify your question, no. Having said that, if I find out differently when I go back and read procedures, I'll let you know. But I don't, my take on it is that you only document the in-kind portion of it. Okay, with SIPA. It applies to things like LSTA, and those of you who, the public library sector have dealt with, our schools have dealt with E-rate, you know it applies there as well. Schools almost automatically filter because they are in loco parentis for the students. Public libraries, that's a local decision. There's a certain level of filtering that goes on today anyway, depending on your IT staff. But bottom line is that if you're a public library or you're a K through 12 and you want LSTA money, we're going to need to know, and your consortium includes K through 12 schools or publics, we're going to need to know from you, if you buy computer equipment, that you're SIPA compliant. And that question will be raised. So if you're in that category, make sure you address it up front. And if you're applying for a product that is computer-based, but you are not going to ever lock it up or attach it to the internet within the duration of the grant funding being applicable, you need to document that as well. So if it ever gets hooked up and it's LSTA funding, that's an issue. So if you're requesting LSTA funds for internet service, for new computer access to the internet, then you have to comply. And if you're asking for peripherals, I would suggest you just send a quick email and we'll confirm. My memory says, and the practice has been, that peripherals don't kick this into play. It is internet service and new computers. If your public library does not filter, because that's a local policy decision, then I suggest you look for a different funding source for your computers. And again, if you receive E-rate discounts for internet or internal wiring, you're already compliant. But just make sure that in your grant application you say so. Okay, we're just going to do another run through to remind you about parts of the grant application. We touched on it before, but this reminder is just another visual trigger for as a checklist. And your DUNS number is required. You need applicant information, including an email. Contact persons can be more than one, and be clear about who those contact people are, because what we are looking for are contact people at your library, and then we need to know, in the case of school libraries, that your contact person is licensed as a school media specialist, or who the district contact person is as the licensed school media specialist if you're not licensed at the building level. So if you have questions about that, let us know. And make sure that you have the LSTA amount in total. Grant persons served is best estimate. We went through a series of slides in previous webinars, a webinar to give you ideas of where to look for data. If you're public library, you can get a lot of that from Bibliostat. You can also get it from the U.S. Census, and those of you who are involved in Community Connect, that is a gold mine for you to pull from. If you're a school library, that's a different discussion, and if it's not, you can get census information. There's the NCES, which is the Clearinghouse on Educational Statistics. There are ways to pull that information. If you need help finding the pathway, let us know. We have staff that can help you. Okay, and when you title it, remember that it should convey what the project is about. And it's how the state and federal agencies will know the project. Make sure it's memorable and clever, but please not too cutesy. And concise as possible, it gets right to the point. The heart of the matter, improving health information access, was used by one grant applicant. Building a community of emergent readers, another example. Serving seniors with special needs is another example. Ready to read with books to go. Just some examples of how some people have titled their projects, and it's helpful to know. Okay, your abstract should be able to stand alone. It's the focus of the reviewers. You need, in that short paragraph, you need to really nail down hard the scope of what you're trying to do, so that when they read it, they get the big picture right up front. In today's world, everybody's busy. our attention is constantly being pulled away from where we're focusing. So a lot of verbiage is not always read carefully, so be sure to focus and make sure it'll stand alone. That it's publishable quality, because it will be copied and pasted into IMLS and into an agency where we have to report any grant over 50 grand has to be documented in what's called FFATA. And I'm still on a learning curve with FFATA, but if you're curious about it, send me a separate email. Clear and concise, I think I said that a couple of times. There is a space limit, and when we had a Word document with rows on a table, people could increase that row, and that's not going to happen with this PDF. So think it through, focus it, make sure that you edit it so it gets exactly where you want to go, and then it fits the space. And cover your key elements in order so there has some logical and linear approach to it for readability. And right after the draft application is complete. So you write your abstract after you've filled in everything else, so you have a big picture of what you've already filled in, and then you can scope it into that abstract. That's a suggestion. If it's not your style, do what works for you. Okay, recap of the application: need, target population and benefits, LSTA and local plans. And I got feedback from IMLS program officer about the equipment over 5,000, and the focus was really on the LSTA priorities, and the LSTA 5-year plans need to be documented, because if the equipment request doesn't map cleanly to those documents, they'll raise questions about it. So, we also want you to wrap this project inside your local plans so that you're showing locally that you know where you're going, and that you're sitting inside of the statewide LSTA planning process. Make sure you have your implementation down and an evaluation. We touched on that before as well. Your budget. I'll get this slide up there and then I'll start talking again. Okay. Support letters, advocates for the project, and who they are, why it's a good idea, and how they're connected to you, and from partners and target audience, what they'll contribute or how they will participate. So we really need those cleanly documented and attached to the grant application. In terms of the electronic version, as a Word attachment, you can attach it to the paper copy you send in as well. Any questions? Okay, and I know some of these webinars sound a little repetitious, and I would acknowledge that, but I also, having worked with Diane and worked in development for a while, I see where sometimes you need to say it multiple times. So thanks for your patience and bearing with us. And then you have these PowerPoints you can go back to as checklists. Okay, I've said this a couple of times, but yeah, be good to have a reviewer-friendly grant. And easily scanned, so they can pick up key points rapidly when they're reading it. Bulleted items is appropriate, though inside that PDF, haven't played with it as much as I would like to, so I'm not sure how that works. But even if you do an asterisk and then a space, as long as you pull it up so people their eyes catch it, and it's not buried in a paragraph that's got long sentences and runs on together. Avoid a full page of solid text, so use white space and visual breathers. These are techniques, especially in today's world, where we're accustomed to what's on our cell phones and what's in USA Today. that we need to break it out so that the content is easily grasped. That doesn't mean that you lose the core content. It's just how you desktop publish it. So headings, subheadings, underlines, and no italics, please. You know, and those kinds of things to help people's eyes catch what you're trying to say. Sorry. Okay, in terms of writing techniques, I've had a long background in academic libraries, and I learned to write in my early career in that environment, and universities have a certain approach. When I left there and moved on to a state library, and I started writing for the online industry in the 1980s, the feedback I got, and is still true today, is to focus on concise sentences. I think at one point, the mantra was no more than about 21 words per sentence. So keep them relatively short, group your related ideas in one paragraph, use the terms found in the guidance, avoid jargon, acronyms, and initials that aren't explained. Librarians tend to talk in acronyms and initials, and you know, the practice is you spell it out the first time, you put the acronym behind that phrase or that name, and then moving forward, you can use the acronym. And that's real helpful because remember, the State Council is not made up of a group of librarians. Most of the people on that council are state employees who are participating, representing their departments, and they were part and parcel of the literacy side of the House. And then there are governor appointees, some of whom are librarians, some of whom are not. And you know, we have a classroom teacher, we've had a business owner in the past. So we've had people who are in various venues, and they may not understand jargon. So I just want to remind you to be real mindful to you know, use it where it's appropriate, but make sure that it is that's real clear. And I just touched on the reviewers don't know what about products or programs, so you need to be clear and clean about it. Proofread. Keyboarding errors happen, and I get that, I do it too, but run spell checker and then have somebody else proofread it for you. If you wrote it, it's sometimes hard to catch your own typos or your own grammatical slips. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what you think you're writing and what your fingers are keyboarding. So just be mindful of it because it is a reflection on how you're presenting it to the reviewers, and you want to be on your best show. And so make sure the reviewers don't have questions. So that means you got to think through how somebody who is not a librarian and reviewing it would ask questions. And maybe somebody on your staff can be that person for you, and you can play roll it to make sure you plug every single hole you can think of. A well-rounded project will have clearly defined needs, 1 or 2 outcomes. And remember, you can send in your outcomes even now, and we'll give you a response so that we can help you make sure they're crafted. You have a well-developed action plan. Your actions are related to those outcomes, and you have a means to determine success and not just counting outputs. Changes in knowledge, skills, and abilities, for example. In terms of grant writing, we would really ask you to read the instructions we've posted on the website and the LSTA plan. Make sure that you go down through each of the elements in those instructions and you address them as part of your grant application. It saves everybody issues later on down the road of clarification and all of that kind of stuff. It just is, it's a way to, pardon me, to stack the deck in your favor, if you will. There are guidelines, and you know, we work in this arena within a framework. We are dealing with a lot of federal mandates and state mandates. These are in law. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room, and they're subject to audit. So make sure you follow the guidelines, and if you have questions about what those mean or what something fits into, ask beforehand. I remember when I first came here in the early 2000s, stories about auditors who would drive out into libraries in Nevada to check and see if the LSTA project implementer or manager had done exactly what they said they were going to do. So people pay attention. You just don't know when that might happen, and stack the deck in your favor ahead of time. And there's room for latitude and creativity in these grant applications. You can get a lot of good things done, but just keep in mind we have that framework we have to deal with. And it doesn't matter whether it's the state, it's LSTA or it's the National Endowment for the Humanities. It doesn't really matter. Everybody has their grant guidelines. LSTA is federal money, so it has extra federal stuff attached to it. Check out the evaluation and scoring elements so you make sure those are real clear and clean. And keep in mind that you're addressing an important need. You're user-oriented, you persuade the reviewers, and you convince them to commit the dollars. If you want computer equipment just because you can't get it funded locally, that probably won't go very far, but if you can document the programs that computer equipment will support for your key stakeholders, that is an approach that will get a positive review. Not that it'll get funded necessarily, but people will respond to it in a proactive manner. Okay, I must admit I borrowed I rolled some of these PowerPoints forward, and Diane actually liked to use that kind of stuff. So you get the benefit of some creativity. Can you sign your own application as the authorized signatory? Maybe yes, maybe no. If your library has a person who's a designated fiscal authority, that's the person who signs it. And it could be the director. I don't know. It depends on your particular organization. It could be, if you're a school district, the grant office. You're responsible to get the appropriate signatures required by the institution. What we would ask is that you have a library contact person on the grant application, even though the signature may be somebody outside the library. Okay, you can mail the application postmarked by November 13th with original signatures, which is what I talked about earlier. And then you can email the PDF template. And we finally got state IT to map our generic email address correctly. That address goes to Celine and myself. If you have any issues with it whatsoever, you all know our email addresses, and if you don't by now, we will make sure you do, because we want to make sure that we get all the stuff in. We're going into an internal review cycle that has a short turnaround, so we can get the stuff mailed out to the grant reviewers to give them plenty of time. And some of this is accounting for the holiday season has hit. So both of these are required. And again, we want the original PDF template filled in. And this date will shift a little bit, but I want to get the internal review done, and I'm trying to accommodate leave and all of that kind of stuff. So internally, I'm probably going to shift that date slightly. We're pretty close to that being on target. We want updates and revisions due by that following Monday, I'm going to start sending out email questions. If for those of you who need to do any revisions or tweaks, you're going to have 5 business days to respond. We want to get all this stuff done by the first week of December so that Sulin and I have the opportunity to build the packets and ship them out to the reviewers. This stuff is big enough that we're not going to be able to send it as email attachments. So we're going to have to account for shipment as part of that process. So that's kind of why we're anticipating target dates. You asked me about anticipating budget amounts. We're anticipating target dates. They're going to be right in that ballpark, but we're also going to have to account for shifts. And so you have my email address. You should have Sulin's. And if you have questions, make sure that you let us know. So we're going to give credit to IMLS for this workshop. And this is the style we ask that you use for your grants as well. So any questions? We took longer and I was probably wordier than I thought I was going to be. But this is our last webinar, and we can deal with questions now, or we can deal with them afterwards. What's your pleasure? I don't see anyone typing, so what I think I'll do is I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and then if you still have questions, I'll be on until everybody exits the Adobe Connect. And to reiterate, you know where to find us, by phone or by email. Oop, Forrest is typing. Okay, well, we will. You're welcome, Forrest. So I am about to stop recording, and thank you everybody for attending. And we will get this transcribed into the format we can post on YouTube, and we'll either do it this afternoon or we'll get it up tomorrow, and we'll let everybody know via email. Thank you, everyone.